For privacy reasons, the names of the patients mentioned in this story have been changed. The imaginary names chosen help us tell the real stories that lie behind them. The case details for the person we shall call Andrea Duval begins just before dawn breaks, when she checks in at the neurologist's reception. She finds a spot on the stiff faux leather sofa in the waiting area. Her fingers entwine nervously. That all too familiar feeling of discomfort washes over her once again. Here she is, back in this place, hoping that this visit might finally shed light on the source of the relentless, debilitating migraines that have plagued her existence. Trying to distract herself, she picks up a glossy magazine from the coffee table. Meanwhile, a television mounted on the wall in the corner plays an old episode of The Price is Right at a low volume. As she waits for her name to be called, the sounds around her start to shift. The cheerful jingles and whistles of the game show distort, rising in pitch and volume until they transform into an ear-piercing shriek echoing in her mind. The fluorescent ceiling lights grow harsh and bright, resembling an interrogation spotlight. Yearning for a neutral focus point, Andrea stares intently at a large fern in the room's corner, praying the sensory overload will soon abate. Yet, instead of relief, a bewildering new feeling grips her. The plant ahead seems to pulse, gradually enlarging. It appears to double, then triple in size. Its verdant fronds almost seem to engulf the room, with the office walls weirdly bending and stretching to accommodate the inexplicably enormous vegetation. Desperately, Andrea shifts her gaze to the other patients waiting. They seem relaxed, eyes glued to the television, completely unaware. Is she the sole observer of this strange phenomenon? Is her sanity slipping through her fingers? Suddenly, a nurse opens the door. The moment Andrea hears her name, the hallucination shatters. The plant snaps back into its regular size. The lights soften, and the warped noises vanish. The experience leaves Andrea shaken and deeply disturbed, so unsettled that when she finally sits across from her doctor, she forgets to mention the bizarre event. But this episode was just the beginning. Over the next 6 years, Andrea's world would sporadically and unpredictably transform into a fantastical, skewed landscape. Rooms would stretch to what felt like 20 feet taller than usual. Houses down the street appeared to shrink to toy-like dimensions, seemingly fragile enough to be crushed between her fingers. Trees seemed to extend endlessly the closer she came. As time went by, these fairy tale-like visions turned into her own personal nightmare. Unbeknownst to her, Andrea was experiencing a rare and poorly understood neurological condition called Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. We plunge into the investigative journey now as we delve deep into this medical mystery, alternatively known as AIWS or sometimes Todd syndrome. This disorder causes those afflicted to experience vivid perceptual illusions, altering the appearance, dimensions, and motion of objects, and even their own bodies. Although only a few cases have been officially documented, some medical experts now speculate this condition could impact an astonishing 10 to 20% of people at some point in their lives. In this exploration, we will examine why AIWS often slips under the radar and proves notoriously elusive to diagnose. We will uncover the syndrome's fascinating historical background through the life and works of the famous writer Lewis Carroll, who might have been among its most well-known sufferers. Lastly, we begin the quest to reveal a scientific explanation for this anomaly and explore the progress made in assisting those whose perception of reality has suddenly been distorted. Imagine this scenario. One morning, you wake up to find yourself ensnared in the world of a surrealist painting. It feels as though you've been plunged into a distorted fairy tale
where the floor seems to leap up to meet you and the ceiling stretches to infinity.
The people surrounding you may suddenly seem to loom as 10-foot giants or shrink to the size of tiny dolls. The gentle tick-tock of a clock might echo in your mind like a burst of fireworks. While this notion may strike some as fantastical, for a few, it's a profoundly real experience. This was certainly the case for a woman we'll call Eleanor.
In the year 2014, one evening found Eleanor tucking her 10-year-old daughter, whom we'll name Sophie, into bed. Sophie often battled intense headaches, particularly at the end of a long day. Yet on this particular night, the young girl revealed something more specific and unsettling. She confided in her mother that everything in her room, from her bookshelf to her toys and desk, was inexplicably shrinking, becoming minuscule.
At the same time, she felt her own body swelling, expanding uncontrollably like a giant in a toy house. At that moment, Eleanor was flooded with a rush of long-repressed memories. Instantly, she was transported back to her own childhood, lying in her bed with a throbbing headache, trying to explain the same perplexing sensation to her own mother. She vividly remembered feeling as though everything in the room had receded far into the distance, like peering through the wrong end of a telescope. For years, she had kept these strange experiences close to her heart, convinced they were nothing more than peculiar dreams or figments of her imagination. Eventually, those episodes had faded away on their own. But now, hearing her daughter describe these surreal experiences with such clarity, she realized they were indeed real, and she felt an overwhelming worry for her child's future. After Sophie fell asleep, Eleanor turned to the internet for answers. What was this bizarre phenomenon that she seemed to have unknowingly passed on to her daughter? Was it dangerous, and could anything be done about it? Within minutes of entering the symptoms into a search engine, the mystery was unraveled. Both Eleanor and her daughter were experiencing a condition known as Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. This unusual disorder has its roots wandering far beyond the digital age and delves deep into history, even further back than the beloved story itself. Increasing research suggests that the whimsical adventures in Wonderland weren't purely imaginative flights of fancy, but were directly inspired by the author's personal encounters with this condition. His real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, an English academic born in 1832. The world would come to know him by his pen name, Lewis Carroll. Carroll was not only a brilliant mathematician and logician, but also painfully shy, a characteristic exacerbated by a significant stammer that followed him through much of his life. Perhaps because of this, he found comfort in the company of children rather than adults. While he worked as a tutor at the prestigious Oxford University, he became a close family friend to the college dean, Henry Little, and was known fondly as a doting uncle to the dean's 3 young daughters, Lorena, Edith, and Alice. Carroll found great delight in entertaining the girls with magic tricks, poetry, and extraordinary stories. During one fabled summer afternoon picnic, he whimsically crafted the tale of a curious young girl who wandered into an enchanting dream world teeming with peculiar characters. The middle child in the family, a 7-year-old girl named Alice, was utterly enthralled by the story, so much so that Carroll, in a rare moment of affection, decided to name the main character after her. She pleaded with him to write it all down. He complied, and by 1865, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland received international acclaim. Yet, as with many famous artists, it's considered that Carroll's extraordinary imagination was fueled in part
by his own inner turmoil. As his fame grew, he kept detailed personal diaries. These writings revealed the lifelong struggle he had with what he called bilious headaches, intense migraines that often brought along nausea. More intriguingly, Carroll noted his experiences with vivid visual auras, or eye disturbances.
He precisely described an episode where he lost a significant portion of the visual field in his left eye. These diaries offer the first real glimpse into Carroll's hidden suffering, and strongly suggest that the bizarre world he so famously crafted might have been a place he unwillingly visited himself. Neurologists today, re-examining Carroll's literature from a medical viewpoint, have arrived at an unexpected conclusion. Most of the important symptoms of his condition weren't concealed.
They were vividly illustrated within the pages of his most famous novel. A particularly unforgettable scene occurs early in Chapter 2, when Alice comes across a tiny bottle bearing a paper label marked "Drink Me." Once she sips the mysterious potion, she shrinks to the size of a bowling pin, and the room around her turns colossal and daunting.
Scholars now think this scene might be Carroll's way of expressing a classic symptom known as macropsia, a perceptual distortion where objects in the outside world appear huge, while the individual feels like their own body is contracting and shrinking. Further exploration of Carroll's writing reveals what appears to be another common symptom of AIWS. His novel illustrates micropsia, the opposite experience, where things seem to diminish, while the individual feels as if their own body is inflating to enormous proportions. Soon after shrinking, Alice munches on a cake that causes her to grow so tall her head brushes against the ceiling. The novel is filled with these medically precise depictions. Alice additionally shows signs of telopsia, where objects seem further away than they actually are.
Experts believe Carroll was alluding to this when he penned, "Curiouser and curiouser," Alice exclaimed. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet." The reverse sensation, palopsia, where distant objects suddenly seem alarmingly close, also features in the syndrome. Carroll might have even used Alice's character to mirror his own battles with depersonalization, a common and deeply disconcerting symptom.
Those who experience depersonalization often feel as though they are watching themselves from outside their bodies, with their identity, thoughts, and emotions feeling phony or detached. In Chapter 2, a baffled Alice ponders, "I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I?" Considering these detailed and imaginative accounts, numerous experts now argue that Alice was a representation of Carroll's neurological symptoms, serving as a brilliant fictional mechanism for him to process and document what he was living through. And Carroll might not have been the sole legendary artist to contend with these mysterious visions. More than a century ago, back in 1726, the renowned writer Jonathan Swift seemed to portray symptoms akin to AIWS in his timeless novel Gulliver's Travels. In this celebrated tale by Jonathan Swift, Gulliver stumbles upon the tiny 6-inch tall inhabitants of Lilliput, and later encounters the enormous 70-foot tall giants of Brodinger. This peculiar contrast serves as a vivid literary representation of the conditions known as micropsia and macropsia. Jumping ahead to the 19th century, the famous German artist Käthe Kollwitz documented her own experiences with what later became known as the Alice in Wonderland Syndrome through her artwork. Her diaries are brimming with descriptions of objects mysteriously altering in size right before her eyes. Many art critics and historians suspect that this curious perceptual phenomenon inspired her transition from a realistic painting style to more emotion-driven expressionism. Her striking artworks often portray figures with disproportionately large heads and hands, potentially illustrating her way of conveying the syndrome onto canvas.
It remains a mystery whether artists like Kollwitz or Swift ever sought the assistance of medical professionals regarding their conditions. Of the author Lewis Carroll, no one desired the stigma of being considered mentally unstable. However, Carroll did indeed seek medical consultation. His journal entries disclose that in 1856 he visited an eye specialist due to his unusual visions. The ophthalmologist, unable to pinpoint the cause, suggested there was nothing wrong and advised him to shun lengthy reading sessions, especially on moving trains, and to choose books with larger print. This piece of advice implied that the doctor regarded Carroll's situation simply as eye strain. Tragically, Lewis Carroll passed away in 1898 without ever uncovering the true essence of his lifelong condition. It would take half a century more before a medical expert began unraveling the mystery of the syndrome. Jumping forward to 1952, an American neurologist, Carroll W. Lipman, started noticing a pattern among his patients, leading him to a breakthrough. He surmised that these bizarre experiences were linked to something familiar to many, debilitating migraine headaches. Yet, as it turned out, this revelation was merely the tip of the iceberg. The same year, the perceptive neurologist began cataloging a series of peculiar cases. While each of his patients battled severe migraines, they described strange, fleeting symptoms he had never previously encountered. The first case involved a 38-year-old woman we'll refer to as Clara. She reported to Dr. Lipman an unsettling sensation just before a migraine, as if her neck had suddenly stretched over a foot in length. During her headaches, she described a feeling of shrinking to just 1 foot tall, while furniture towered over her like enormous skyscrapers. Another patient, a 23-year-old woman, shared an experience akin to Clara's. She recounted that during her migraines, her head seemed to balloon to gigantic proportions, yet it felt so weightless it appeared to levitate toward the ceiling. Then Dr. Lipman met another woman we'll call Martha. With Martha's testimony, the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Martha recounted her migraine spells often made her feel she was expanding in width and height. She remarked it felt like a Tweedledee or Tweedledum sensation, referencing the classic characters from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Lipman was among the trailblazing physicians to establish this clear connection between the medical phenomenon and Carroll's tale. He noted, "I would hesitate to report these hallucinations had not more than 80 years ago a great and famous writer set them down in immortal fiction." Lipman became confident that the fantastical experiences of Alice mirrored the signs suggesting Carroll had himself suffered from the same syndrome. Upon examining around 12 different individuals, he became certain about the nature of the bizarre condition he was observing. This strange disorder appeared to be a rare side effect resulting from migraine headaches. Nonetheless, the notion of it being solely linked to migraines was short-lived. In 1955, a British psychiatrist by the name of John Todd introduced a series of revolutionary insights. It was Dr. Todd who came up with the enduring term for this condition, Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. He was also the first to offer a thorough and detailed description of its multiple symptoms. Some of his patients mentioned feeling as though they were divided into two, which he termed somatic psychic duality. Other individuals reported that colors would change unpredictably right before their eyes, a phenomenon he described as dyschromatopsia. For instance, One young girl recounted how her mother's face would suddenly turn a shade of green. Moreover, Todd's patients frequently spoke about a peculiar sense of time slowing down, almost as if everything surrounding them moved in slow motion. He also documented occurrences of zoopsia, where patients experienced vivid visual hallucinations of animals, with some claiming that flocks of birds or swarms of insects would unexpectedly appear and flutter around their heads. Nevertheless, Dr. Todd's most pivotal discovery was this: unlike Lipman's patients, not all of those with AIWS experienced migraines. He identified that the syndrome could stem from other sources. A 17-year-old girl with a history of anxiety but no migraines often felt her body would shrink to half its normal size. Another, a 39-year-old woman who endured panic attacks, was convinced her body could expand to such a degree it would fill an entire room. Additionally, Todd noted that 2 of his patients had a history of epilepsy, a neurological condition that disrupts electrical activity between neurons. Subsequent case studies would further substantiate this connection, documenting instances where patients with seizures experienced micropsia and macropsia events. Ultimately, John Todd's research broadened the entire scope of the mystery. He concluded that the syndrome was, as he articulated, intricately linked with both migraines and epilepsy, yet not limited to these ailments alone. The mystery was only deepening. Not long after Dr. Todd's groundbreaking research, 2 distinct cases of AIWS surfaced within the medical field, hinting at the possibility of other factors at play. In 1975, an 18-year-old college student, whom we will refer to as Laura, developed a persistent itchy rash that lingered for over 4 days. She also suffered from a severe case of pharyngitis, with swelling at the back of her throat. As weeks passed, Laura's symptoms grew more severe. Her appetite disappeared completely. However, the most unsettling development was a series of strange visual distortions. Objects appeared distant and out of focus, and she felt as though her body would shrink and then suddenly expand to fill an entire room, as if the world presented itself through a fisheye lens. Suspecting that Laura's symptoms might be stress-related, her doctor referred her to a psychiatrist. However, the psychiatrist found no signs of psychosis. She was then advised to undergo an EEG test to assess the electrical activity in her brain, in case she was silently grappling with epilepsy. Yet the EEG results showed nothing abnormal. Nevertheless, a physical examination revealed that both her spleen and lymph nodes were enlarged, clear signs that her body was fighting an infection. Thus, they tested Laura for the Epstein-Barr virus, now commonly referred to as mononucleosis or mono. The diagnosis came back positive. Medical experts began to speculate whether this common virus could be triggering the puzzling syndrome. They treated the mono with antibiotics, which led to the diminishment of many physical symptoms. Yet her Alice in Wonderland syndrome endured. For a grueling 9 months, Laura continued to experience altered color perception, hallucinations regarding her body image, and dysesthesia. At first, the physicians might have dismissed her condition as merely an odd medical anomaly, until more individuals with mononucleosis began displaying the same peculiar symptoms. In that notable July, a 17-year-old, we'll name Sarah, found herself utterly drained, her vision increasingly fuzzy, and plagued by mild headaches. She didn't feel any physical transformation in her body, yet it seemed as though everything around her either shrank or expanded without logic. On top of this, her spleen was found to be swollen, and her fingers had started to puff up. Before long, she too was found to have tested positive for mononucleosis. Much like Laura's ordeal, Sarah's strange symptoms
reminiscent of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome, persisted for 2 months, even after the virus cleared up. During that time, she experienced hallucinations a couple of times a week. In the blink of an eye, however, they disappeared completely, leaving behind no trace. These cases turned previous understanding of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome on its head. None of these individuals had any family history of seizure disorders or migraines, and they hadn't taken any psychoactive drugs. Their afflictions seemed directly linked to the Epstein-Barr virus. Nonetheless, medical professionals were baffled by why this rare syndrome appeared connected to some of the world's most common viruses.
Clearly, there was a defining reason why certain people were plunged into this bizarre experience, while others were not. Let's return to Eleanor, the determined mother from our earlier story. Her tireless quest for answers led her to Dr. Sheena Arora, a neurologist at Stanford. Without delay, Dr. Arora considered the possibility of a genetic link. Taking her advice to heart, Eleanor probed her family about their histories. She discovered that her 14-year-old son had secretly been enduring the same condition, feeling too embarrassed to voice it. Her sister recounted experiencing similar hallucinations tied to her childhood migraines. Even their brother had experienced these symptoms during his battle with mononucleosis. For Dr. Arora, it was becoming evident that a genetic predisposition was at play in some families. The crux was not in the initial trigger, but in how the brain responded to it.
The majority of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome cases are still associated with migraines, particularly during the aura phase. Modern scientific theories suggest that auras result from a temporary dip in cerebral blood flow. This flux confounds the visual cortex, which is responsible for processing the raw visual information from our retina. This data then travels to the parietal lobe, the brain region dedicated to turning it into our conscious perception of the world.
Any disturbance in the blood flow can scramble the brain's signals, causing auras, or in extreme cases, Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. However, it's not just about what the patient sees. Some, like those treated by Dr. Monson-Lipman, have reported a sensation of change within themselves, an eerie feeling of protruding or shrinking, or perhaps their neck elongating. Doctors postulate that this too is tied to insufficient oxygen, especially in the posterior parietal lobe. In addition to interpreting visual data, this brain sector is responsible for our sense of bodily perception, shaping our inner image of ourselves. When deprived of adequate blood or oxygen, this vital region can temporarily alter how a patient perceives their body's dimensions. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome might be a more complex and pronounced form of a migraine aura, yet it still doesn't explain how individuals without any history of migraines can develop this syndrome. The mystery might be unraveled in the story of a 21-year-old college student we'll call David. Back in 2008, while immersed in his college studies, David began experiencing persistent episodes. On a morning stroll, each step he took felt as if it sank a bit deeper into the ground. His fingers seemed to stretch far off towards the distant horizon. The cars parked along the street looked incredibly tiny, resembling nothing more than miniature toys. Strangely, David never reported experiencing headaches, nor did he show any symptoms of mononucleosis or epilepsy. The intensity of his Alice in Wonderland syndrome grew so severe that just the thought of leaving his house became overwhelmingly daunting. Eventually, his medical team presented an intriguing suggestion. Perhaps David was experiencing silent migraines. This condition is known to manifest every symptom of an aura, minus the accompanying pain. This theory could potentially explain the experiences of Dr. Todd's patients, who felt a surge of anxiety alongside their hallucinations.
The anxiety might not have been simply a reaction, but rather another manifestation of the silent migraine itself. Interestingly, it seems that conditions like migraines, epilepsy, and viral infections such as mono are more interconnected than once thought. They all share similar changes within the brain. People with epilepsy often report experiencing auras ahead of their seizures.
Both migraines and seizures can cause sudden shifts in the brain's electrical or chemical activities, which may lead to a reduction in blood flow. In cases of mono, Alice in Wonderland Syndrome emerges due to swelling in the brain tissue, once again affecting circulation. Thus, all these issues seem to lead to a common destination.
A study published in 2017 by neurologists came to a conclusion suggesting that any condition that temporarily obstructs blood flow to the visual paths and the parietal lobe could result in this enigmatic syndrome. Advanced neuroimaging techniques, such as SPECT scans, have successfully captured clear images of decreased cerebral blood flow during an episode. Despite significant breakthroughs, the journey of discovery remains ongoing, with many mysteries yet unsolved. One puzzling aspect is why the condition resolves naturally over time for most. The brief appearance of symptoms, often lasting just 10 minutes, makes the syndrome notoriously difficult to study, complicating a precise diagnosis even further. As of now, there is no definitive test to confirm or rule out Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. Among the medical community, it is now thought that the condition may be surprisingly common, yet predominantly undiagnosed.
The primary reason for this is a profound fear of being wrongly labeled as having a psychotic disorder. This stigma has significantly hindered research progress, keeping Alice in Wonderland Syndrome from being recognized in the official pages of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. According to strict medical guidelines, the condition is not officially acknowledged, posing a considerable hurdle.
In one interview, a woman we'll call Clara shared her frustration after seeking help from a reputable psychiatric institution, only to hear the disheartening news. Because this isn't a medically recognized condition, it wasn't listed in any of their records, leaving them unable to direct her to a specialist who could help. Due to the lack of exploration, no specific cure for the syndrome is available.
As a result, physicians can only suggest addressing the root cause, whether it be migraines, mono, or anxiety. Fortunately, for many, Alice in Wonderland Syndrome is a temporary affliction. While a few rare cases persist for years, most people find their symptoms diminishing after several weeks or months, often disappearing entirely post-childhood. As for Lewis Carroll, he managed to transform his neurological ordeal into a forever enchanting storybook.
Yet, for those enduring the terrifying and isolating experience of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome, it is a journey into the unknown they would much rather avoid. This story of a peculiar syndrome is just one account in our collection. Countless others are out there, all bearing witness to the timeless mystery of the human mind and the unique paths medicine has traversed.
If you're looking to explore a collection of underappreciated stories, make sure to tap that subscribe button and remember to activate the notification bell. Join us on this exciting voyage into the captivating shadows where science intertwines with mystery. There is an abundance of cases ready to be revealed.